So when we're thinking about mapping, what it means to map, what a map is, how we do mapping, we're really engaging with this idea of abstraction. And this is something that I think is important to connect with after we've gotten our first experiences with GIS, working with a little bit of data, working with a little bit of just understanding how the platform functions, how we perceive information in there. When we were working with, say, the county's data or the town's data or any of the information that we got to play with, we saw the representation of these features on a map. We saw a base map of some kind, imagery, topography, what have you. We saw boundaries, lines with filled in colors. We saw points for schools. We saw lines for trails or roads or anything you can think of. These features are abstracted from the real tangible things that are out there in the world. You can go and visit a street, like in this example here, and then you can make a choice of how to represent that on a map. Maybe you represent some streets as bigger or smaller. Maybe you represent the amount of traffic on those streets with colors or symbols. Maybe you represent their function or their utility or construction status, some aspect, some characteristic of those streets. All those things, when we map them, become these graphical representations of what is happening or what was happening when we collected the data in that real world space. The same with buildings. Those are building footprints, right? There's little squares for houses and big squares for bigger houses, whenever you see squinty there. There's individual points for customers or a point for a school. Everything we choose to do, everything we choose to represent on a map is part of the decision-making process that we have in terms of how to functionally take the very complex real world and then condense it and represent it into a simpler map document. This representation works both in terms of content, but also in terms of trickier things like scale. How do you deal with things like turning the globe, which is 3-dimensional, into a map, which is 2-dimensional? And those are things that we'll continue to explore. As we start, though, we have to kind of ground ourselves in this nature of abstraction. We are faced with choices other people have made. If we download data, someone else made a lot of choices about that data, how it's structured, what it contains, when it was built, so on and so on. Someone else made those choices. We get to choose to use that data, then how to represent it. What colors are we going to use? What data are we going to show? And these things work as an advantage at times, meaning that we can advantageously simplify our representation of the world. And there are disadvantages at times. We hide stuff. We keep things from being as transparent or as clear as they might be by cutting down on the details that we show. All of these are choices you're making as someone doing GIS, as someone who is creating maps, as someone who is performing cartographic activities. And the more aware you are of what choices you can make, what choices you can't make, the more aware you are of how those choices are going to influence what people think about or what people do with your mapped information, the better your map products and your GIS work and so on will be. Because all maps are graphical representations of the milieu. Here's your vocabulary word for the day. When we say milieu, we mean environment. And when we say environment, we mean cultural and physical. So there are aspects of the physical environment, elevation, land cover, so on. There are aspects of the cultural environment. Who lives in a place? What's the net income? What's the racial background? All of these things can be mapped, and all of these contribute to an environment. These also include mental representations, mental abstractions. We can map things like, where is a safe place? We can map things like, where is a place that you feel scared? These ideas and perceptions and feelings are just as mappable as topography, net income, education level, tree cover, anything else you could imagine. Combined with this representational aspect is a presentation aspect. So we have to represent our environments, cultural, physical, mental, so on. But we also have to present those in a way that is pleasing, for lack of a better, deeper term. We need to use a nice color scheme. We need to use a good design idea. As this quote continues, former director of the American Geographical Society, John Wright, an ugly map may be as intrinsically as accurate as a beautiful map, but is less likely to inspire confidence. So we are stuck at a lot of different confluences. We have to make maps that are abstractions of all of these realities, all of these perceptions, all of these natures of our environment. But we also have to make maps that represent those well. And so we are stuck at this kind of intensive crossroads. It doesn't mean that we can't make a bad map. That's fine, especially if you've never learned how to make a good map. It doesn't mean that we can't try to struggle with understanding what we can map, especially if we've never dealt with what kind of data do we need, what can we map, questions like that. We can be novices or beginners in all of these aspects and still grow. That's great. There's no way to grow or to learn how to do something than to practice it. We just have to realize and connect with all of these areas that we need to grow in. And I think maps are easy to do this growth with because we are so used to them. You have seen maps constantly. You've probably seen a lot of maps in the past 24 hours, whether consciously looking up something on Google Maps or looking at a place to get food delivered, whatever it might be. or unconsciously, where you've just passed by a map or digested it as part of maybe reading the news. I won't say newspaper. No one reads newspapers anymore. You're reading a news story, saw a map. Looking at COVID cases, saw a map. Riding the bus, saw a map. Walking to get some food, saw a map. Maps allow us to deal with spatial questions, get spatial answers. And everyone was constructed by someone who made decisions on what to show you. And everyone had different motivations on what to show you. Talk about that in the next clip. You are already an accomplished mapper. We are always mapping things. So there's not in as much a novice beginner, I've never mapped anything before. It's more I've never formally mapped anything. Because we all have our own mental maps, our own internal conceptions of space and place and areas that are comfortable or not comfortable, areas we are familiar with or not familiar with, places we like and dislike. Within ourselves, we have an ever-changing structure and context of what the environment is. They change over time, we adapt them. So you've got maps down. So what I'm going to ask you to do, a little activity, is whether digitally or on a piece of paper, when we would do this in class, I would say piece of paper. But since we're all digital, I think digital is fine too. So in Paint or some other drawing thing, or on a piece of paper using, the whiteboard function in Zoom, wherever you want. I want you to map your day. By day, I mean you woke up at some point, and between waking up at some point, you are now watching this lecture. I want you to map that. I want you to use just your mental recollections. So no Google Maps or Google Earth or anything like that. And sketch out what your day's been. You don't have to share this if you don't want to, but I will have, or there is now, through the magic of technology, there is a little link on our Moodle page to share those maps so that everyone can see their comparative mapping prowess. Every mental map is a good one. So this video is going to stop. You're going to do your little mapping activity. You can post it if you want to. Then we'll continue on with our discussion. So once again, pull out a piece of paper or digital, whatever you like. Map your day to day. So you woke up, did some things, and now you're here. Map what that's been like. And if you want to, post it on the link on Moodle. Have fun.